Hello, Culture Matters podcast. Boy, I'm excited about our episode today. Before I introduce our guest, here's a quote just for this episode. Having the desire to help, the courage to move, and the patience through the process. Responsible. The R in Guardian Roofing and Siding. Our guest today, founder of Guardian, friend of the Culture Matters podcast, leader, steward, exemplar of culture, values, learning, being better, getting better. If you haven't listened to Robert Frehafer on the show, please go through our episode, Cachet, and take a look at his journey. Today, we're going to be talking about the R in Guardian, but from a opposite standpoint, or the opposite of the value. If you haven't listened to our episode on the value, R, responsibility, or responsible rather, take a look at that episode. Robert, thanks for coming back to the show.
Thanks for having me, Jay. It's always great to be here.
So Guardian, right? The R in Guardian is responsible. Having the desire to help, the courage to move, and the patience through the process. What do you say the opposite of that is, and why?
You know, we take this little time beforehand and we write down kind of like what comes to our mind of like, oh, this is the opposite. And so what I have written here is from responsible, and the opposite of it is not wanting to help, fear of all risk, and super anxious all the time. It does make me laugh when I read it. It's easy for me when we go through these values and I look at them. I would say it's easy for me to talk about them in the positive light, right? How do we use them? How do we impact? How does it impact our daily lives? But the my experience is that the values are written in so many times based off of my past negative experiences, right? Like this is a reminder of the way, the harder, maybe potentially at first seemingly harder way to live because of so many things that I've gone through. The desire to help, I think that's always been there for me. That's an underlying trait, which truly can come from a potentially negative spot, depending on how it's viewed. It's very, on an outset, you'd say like, oh, somebody wants to help people. That seems good and healthy. But there more than likely is a driver inside of me of insecurity, not wanting someone to think bad of me, rooted in an insecurity in the past where I was not even aware of those things. I would go over and above so much responsibility, so much reaching out, following up, doing all the things from a business standpoint. So no one would ever be able to question my character, my whatever, my desire, my laziness, work ethic, and things of that nature. So I think that there is an unhealthy balance that created such activity. That's again a lot of help from working with you. You have a theory, and you've said it that the more trauma that someone has gone through, the more creative that they can be. So the second part of it is the courage to move, because I have a lot of times fear has ran in. I took so much time to evaluate risk and all the things that could go wrong, and ultimately that courage is a balance. It's a counterbalance to fear, right? Like to move forward regardless of what potential risk could be. And in our business, it's real simple, right? Like you're moving forward with picking up the phone to call somebody, knocking on a door, having a conversation with somebody, meeting with an adjuster. There's anxiety that can rise up in all those things. And then the lastly is like the patience through the process. it comes from, I think so many times have been lack of patience and anxious, right? Like, so when we live out the guardian values, this is the reminder of how hard it is and where it's driving from to have a desire to help and hold on to that. That's a positive thing. The courage to move, we have this intuition that rises up like, oh, this is the right way, the right thing. We can bounce that off of other people in our organization, other sales reps, other office staff, and then we can have the patience through the process. Because once we make a decision, we think we know what's right. Not everybody's on board and they understand it. So to have that patience and moving through. So when I write that, like the not wanting to help, I'm sure there's a time, in my life where it's just like, oh, I don't want to. It's too tiring. It's draining. I don't want to, right? For whatever reason. But a lot of times that's the end result of the fear and anxiety is like, all right, I don't want to help. Like, I don't even want to get involved in this because it could cause a problem. But definitely something that I say it's got to be once a month. And I get this from my grandmom on my dad's side. She's passed away, but nothing ventured, nothing gained. You have no opportunity to gain or for anybody else if you don't venture it. So yeah, that's a my quick rundown of the opposite of this. And it's not, I laugh when I write it. Like, could you imagine if this is what we taught? This is how I taught the reps, like from an old experience, like you don't want to help, but we got to do what we got to do. You're going to be fearful in all your risk, weigh out every option, everything that could go wrong. And I'm saying this, but if I think of that, even that statement, go back 8 years, like I can remember telling people, like, you got to think of this, you got to think of this, you got to think of this, all these things. Like I was imparting that part of me, that value, that essence into the reps that I was working with. And there's utility in some of that stuff, but to bring in so much fear, I don't in an unhealthy balance, I think it was the wrong way at that, learn hindsight. And anxiety is still something that I deal with. And we've talked about that a lot, about how and so many things that from a practical and practice standpoint have been able to remove so much anxiety from me. And it's that fear and then the that would hold me back from having confrontations, just keep moving to avoid anxiety. It's like I just saw these couple of videos. I watch YouTube sometimes will suck up my time. And on Sunday, my daughter had a friend over from church and we played some games. We went bowling. And then like an hour before youth group, we were just watching like fail videos or stupid fail videos or something like that. And these dogs would be tied to something like a chair or something like that. And they would be running away, but the chair would be following them through the leash. And then they would keep running. They're so scared. And I look at what the actions, attitude, the things that I either avoided or handled poorly were creating more anxiety. And as we worked together and I could stop doing certain activities or actions and start doing others, what it in different scenarios that would make sense. But then that anxiety started to slow down. So it was like, it's almost like the dog stopping, looking back at the chair and be like, oh, that's a chair. Let me just stand here, wait for somebody to fix this or walk back up to the house. But the same things that I was doing was creating so much more anxiety and making me keep on this cycle. So that's been huge for navigating that, which I think in and of itself could be a 10 episode series of the things that we've gone through and the application, the understanding of anxiety and how it moves, but also there's this helpful side of business that anxiousness will create movement and a lot of good things can come out of it as well. But I found, as we've worked together, that I can still utilize those same intuitions and thoughts and handle them in a different way and not have such a negative experience of anxiety and a lot of peace through those same things. So that's the inverse of responsible.
I wrote this down. Some what comes to mind. If we didn't live in opposite of our values, speaking them, moving toward them would have no meaning. Therefore, we must articulate them talk about them, and listen to our enemies, critics, those in judgment of us around them, to continually reorient ourselves around our values. The values we say we believe, the values we fight wars over, the values we are willing to risk it all for. Like why are we laughing, right? We read these things. Well, because we definitely do all this. So it's like we have to laugh. If you, whatever anyone's listening to this writes down that they believe they stand for, they want to stand for their ideal employee, and then just write the opposite of it down. The likelihood is that's an inclination. That's a natural tendency. Yeah, I think it's the absence of talking about them, the absence of trying to get clear on the absence of some, even listening to this or re-listening to this for us, that will decrease the likelihood of moving away from what we would laugh at and increase the likelihood of moving closer to what we would be more proud about. But that makes me think, like, yeah, of course, if we didn't live in the opposite, then they would have no meaning. Wouldn't even need to talk about it. Or think about it. They got to exist more in the abstract than in reality. More in the, yeah. It's like it takes a lot of work to bring that potential to actual. It's trying to, we're trying to grab at these things and bring a little bit of them into actually how things pan out. Like when you said earlier, not wanting to help, fear of risk, and super anxious all the time. Those are two constant, not only in like life, but if in a business, we start a business, a rational mind is going to be afraid of what could happen. Uh, Anxiety. What's anxiety? It being in between the known and the unknown. Like we know ABC, so we're leaving the house, going into the woods, because we know enough to give ourselves like enough of a reason to go get food. Maybe we know how to use a bow. But then we go into the woods. We don't know where the deer is going to be. We don't know if all our practice was enough. We don't know if there's going to be a bear. We don't know all these things. So anxiety is natural starting a business. It's also natural starting a new job. It's natural being in an environment, being employed in a culture where one's uncertain of the future of their job and the future of the organization. I mean, it's a constant, right? So I liked what you said about the not wanting to help has a connection to the fear of risk and the super anxiety. Because maybe my I want to help is up here, but based on fear and anxiety, I want to help go to the bottom. How do I help somebody if I don't help myself? That's a constant tension being in business. But that's what came to mind when you were, if we didn't live in the opposite of our values, speaking and moving towards them, and they had no meaning.
When you said that the first time, that if we didn't live in the opposite, that they wouldn't have the value or the meaning. There's the saying that everybody knows, like, and I'm saying everybody knows it now. I'm like, oh, how do you say that again? But like, smart man learns from his own mistakes, and a wise man learns from others, or woman, whatever. But ideally, if these values can be adopted from a positive standpoint, someone that may not struggle with the same type of things that I struggle with, they might just be good, tend to like good rules for them to live by, and they can adopt these things. So my argument with you would be that they can adopt these and come to enjoy the pleasure of it without having the harsh, absence of these values. So I do believe that, from like a biblical standpoint, he who is forgiven much loves much, right? But it's still that somebody can, so there's exactly what you're saying. Like, we can appreciate the value when we live in the opposite of it, but doesn't mean that it's not of value and a learning lesson and a practical and applicable. So, because that's the goal. Well, for me, that's part of the goal. Even with doing this, why the heck are we sitting here talking to each other and we're recording it? We're going to share it with others because we really do want to help. We have a desire to help. We have the courage to move through, right? Because I could say stuff that might not make me look like a smart guy or got all my stuff together or whatever. There's an inherent risk, and then having patience through this process. So again, these are rules that apply, but the point is with that is that we're doing it because I believe that we want to impact other people for the positive. And if there's somebody that's listening to this, yes, of course, those that can relate, one intention for me for a podcast like this is that someone that struggled with these same anxiousness, fears, anxieties, I just said that twice. They have this desire to help, but it gets crippled by these other actions. And if they're unaware of what's going on in their life and why this is happening, just keep finding themselves in that same pattern, like I did, it's like a voice of hope. Like, and again, this is, practice and not perfection, but I have remarkably improved. I have remarkable improvements in my life, relationships, business. It pays off in dividends financially, relationally, spiritually. So the hope is to share that, right? And if I just came on and said, yes, this is how it is, and this is what goes on, and this is how I've had my success, well, that's not true, right? My success was in failure, getting back up, doing failure, reaching out like to you as one person. Like, I don't know what it is, but I need culture, right? Like, everybody's talking about culture. And then to come to find out that culture is not like a thing that you buy. It's not a thing that you borrow. You do borrow it in essence, but it's something that you are. It's you. As the leader of the company, it's me and all the things that I do, accept, example. This is what I'm going to attract, or I'm going to keep people away that aren't interested in that same thing. So all that being said, this activity that we're doing in sharing this, that's one reason, is to help other people. And then another reason is that I want to display who I am. It's helpful for me to help other people, as well as I want to attract people that are like, man, I like that guy. I like what he's talking about. They might want to work with a company like Guardian Roofing and Siding to have a project done, or to work with the company from a production standpoint, or installation, or a sales capacity management. Somebody that says, oh, that's a great company, I'd like to understand them more. What do they do? How can I be a part of that? So there's all kinds of things that are mixed in here. And for the desire to move forward, and help people, like, that's in alignment with these values. So the point is that how do we appreciate the value if we didn't go through it? Like, your statement was that we appreciate the value, it's valuable when we have the other side. I believe that there is this concept that somebody can learn from my mistakes and maybe not go through as much pain through that. The other thing that came to mind and I wanted to touch base on was that you talked about the fear, and it's business. It's anywhere. You use the example of going into the woods. You've done the training on with the bow and arrow. You know what you're going for. You're going to get a deer, but you can come across the bear, no deer, mess up, all these different things that go on. And it really, this when I talk about this value, it is so coupled with faith, right? So yes, we become anxious, right? And biblically, we're commanded, do not be anxious about anything, but in everything, through prayer and supplication, present your requests to God, and the peace of God, which transcends all understanding, will guard your heart and your minds in Christ Jesus. So that's an applicable statement to this value, because even in the value, when it says having a desire to help, the courage to move, and the patience through the process, like these are things where I have to have faith, right? I have to have this faith to have courage through this, because if not, it's so crazy. And then the patience is that just because I have a plan of action, a direction, what I'm going to do, again, I talked about in the very beginning, doesn't mean anybody around me is going to have that same. And that goes for not only the leader of the company, that can go for the salesperson that's going out there. I equate it to knocking a door, right? Somebody's going to say no, but there's a process that you just keep going through till you find somebody that's the right way. You try again, you sharpen your arrow, you go practice different things, you try something else, right? And but it could be anybody that's involved in an organization. And I say this, and I don't want to say this position like it's a lesser, because I don't believe it is, but it is something. It's an entry level position. Somebody that's delivering flyers at the door. I'm going to teach a certain way. It's going to be taught to them through management. Okay, you got to staple the card, put the rubber band on there, put it on the door, knock the door like this, stand this way. But ultimately, there can be an improvement that goes on that person that's in that role reports back up like, "Hey, I found this works, or I found this other thing works." So this application of, desire to help, it spreads out everywhere in the organization, but it is something like all of these things are coming from life and from work. So I really believe that the tie-in of the faith portion is that, for me, that's what I've found. That is a foundational portion of removing anxiety, fear, and like that desire to help. It doesn't remove it, it grows it more when it's coupled with faith. Because if it's all on my own strength, or I'm relying on the people in the organization, or those around me, or the shingle manufacturers, or whatever else it is, they're going to fail. Everything I've found, people, products, etc., they fail. There's a point of failure at some point, some way, and so it's like expected at this point. But I can have that faith to continue to move forward, solve that next problem that comes up, and I do trust in this sovereign God that has control over everything, right? And I can drive myself crazy through the process, or I can have faith and trust and move through with patience through the process. So it is something, when you talk about that going out and hunting, it's either self-will, right, through so much performance, and then time and trusting in self. But ultimately, I found that for me, when that's coupled with faith, the self can actually will be lacking. And again, that's another biblical teaching, is that you know God uses the unequipped to do the work, right? Like that's actually who he chooses and uses to do his work. So um all that being said, when you mentioned that the faith, I think I would be remiss if we didn't talk about how that's coupled with my job and what I do. That's something that's a big thing on my end.
Hmm. Closing for the listener that's looking at what's next, they're thinking for themselves. What's your closing remarks?
Once I get talking about faith, it's hard to like veer my mind off, because I look at that as the foundation of everything. So closing remark is, anyone that's listening, you're made in the image of God. You are creative. He has a plan for you, loves you, wants to know you through a relationship through Jesus, right? Like, so that's number one. From a business standpoint, um, through some of the work that we've done, is slowing down, listening to the people around you, asking questions inquisitively, understanding what's going on, and looking at to raise your level of awareness. Because a lot of times I've avoided those type of things. They were uncomfortable. I didn't want to hear it. I just like talk my vision to them. I'd block them off. Not that I still can't go in a direction that I want to go, but I could still listen, and it could be impactful to the directions that I go. Um, keep holding on from a business standpoint. I believe that wherever it is, whatever the business is, there's some problem being solved, some solution, some service rendered, something along those lines that's going on that we believe like we're helping someone in some capacity. And it's okay to help ourselves through that. Like, I think that culturally, so many people are looking at, well, that's my own view. Like, oh, I'm just there to help people, just here to help people. Like, you're also helping yourself through that. And I think the more that we can example that, verbalize it, share it with our client, that it doesn't become, we can become more authentic. And then from that point, um, make educated decisions, weigh out risk, listen to your intuition, but don't let it be so heavy on you. And then that also couples with talking to the people around you, or experts or people that have been through it before, coaches, advisors, however you lay that out. And then the patience through the process, just to act on it, make a plan, lay it out, when it will happen, when you'll do it, what the, just to use some regular sales stuff, some key performance indicators, some things for accountability, revamp and pull your plans out as a leader, if you're leading in a company, or if you're, an employee, what you want to do, where you plan to go. You share that vision with the people around you, and get feedback, and move on these things, and have courage and patience as you go through these things. So that's my encouragement to the listener.
If you're listening to this episode, please share it to a friend, leave a review for the Culture Matters podcast, follow Robert, listen to some of our episodes in the past on the Culture Matters podcast, and we will see you next time.